Week 2 of the fantasy football season, and he has top 36 wide receivers. I'm ranking this week number 1, Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins. Tyreek Hill, he's on a mission this season. He said he wants to get 2,000 yards. And in week 1, he had a monster ball game, 215 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. So this week here, I know it's a tough matchup kind of at the New England Patriots. You know, Belichick's going to try to take Hill out of this game and out of the ball game, but it just doesn't work like that. This guy, he burns secondaries, double coverage, single coverage, bump and run. It doesn't matter what you throw at him. With his speed and his ability to find the ball on the deep ball and him the chemistry with Tua, it's a dangerous 1-2 combo. And right now I got Hill at 1, number 2, Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings. So Jefferson, he had a big ball game in week 1, over 100 yards in that one. I know week 2 it's a tough matchup on paper of Philadelphia, but he's an elite receiver. Obviously, most fantasy week number 1 overall pick this season here. And even if Bradbury or Demarius Slay is going to be on him, I still think Jefferson will get his numbers and put in a ball game. So he's 2-3. Stephon Diggs of the Buffalo Bills. So Diggs, he had a nice week 1 versus a tough Jets secondary with Sauce Gardner on him majority of the ball game. 10 catches, 102 yards and a touchdown. And this week here, a weaker secondary versus in the Vegas Raiders. And this is the home opener for this Buffalo Bill team. We know Stephon Diggs, he's an explosive receiver. And as long as him and Allen are on the same page here, he's going to keep putting up numbers. So I got him at 3 for Ja'Marr Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals. So Chase, he had a horrible ball game for his standards with only 9 fantasy points in week 1. But I think him and this Cincinnati Bengal team bounce back in a big way. It's a big game. I know it's week 2, but division rival, the Baltimore Ravens. And Ja'Marr Chase, we know he's a great talent, and he was the second receiver off the board in most fantasy drafts. So this week here, I got him at 4, number 5, Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions. So he's quickly becoming one of the best wide receivers in the league, is St. Brown. Week 1, he had a big ball game with 19 fantasy points at the Kansas City Chiefs. This week here, it's going to be a shootout, I believe, between them and the Seahawks over there in Detroit, like it was last season over there. And St. Brown, he could run all the routes, and he's a motivated wide receiver, obviously, where he carries a list around of all the wide receivers taken before him in that draft that season. So this year, I think it's a big year for Brown. This week, I think it's a good game for him. Even though Seattle, they do have some good coverage guys in the secondary, I don't think it matters in this one. And I got him at 5, number 6, A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles. A.J. Brown had a mediocre game in week 1, and that Eagle team, they just weren't on par for whatever reason. I know they won the ball game, but not much happened in the receiving game for this Eagle team. But right now, Thursday Night Football here tonight, home opener, Minnesota Vikings, their secondary isn't all that great. Baker Mayfield took advantage of it, and I think A.J. Brown, he really has big games at home, and he has a big one this week, number 7, Davante Adams of the Las Vegas Raiders. So Adams, week 1, he still had a decent ball game, but he didn't put up the monster numbers. I know it's a tough matchup at the Buffalo Bills, but we just saw Garrett Wilson, who's an elite type of receiver, have a good ball game. So I think Davante Adams in this one, he's going to make a few plays. I know he missed practice on Wednesday, but I think he's going to be fine as Adams. He's going to play in this one, and this could be a ball game where they're down early and often is Vegas, and they're going to have to throw the rock a lot. So I think Adams gets his numbers, and especially if Jacoby Myers is out in this game, that's just more targets coming his way. Number 8, Calvin Ridley of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So he's a wide receiver that quickly climb up the rankings as well. So Ridley in week 1 after getting suspended for the whole season. And he had a monster ball game, Ridley, 101 yards, and he found the end zone. So him and Trevor Lawrence have good chemistry already. They worked on it a lot in the preseason and training camp. And this week here versus a mid-Kansas City Chiefs secondary where we saw St. Brown have a nice game. I think Ridley has another good game this week, and I got him at 8, number 9, Devonta Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles. So Devonta Smith, we know he's a home run hitting type of receiver where there could be ball games where he gets 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then games like last week where it's a pedestrian 8 to 10 fantasy points. So right here, Devonta Smith, think he could take advantage of the secondary over there for this Minnesota Viking team. This Eagle team, I know their offense didn't look great in week 1, but I think the offense bounces back and they have a good ball game. And Devonta Smith, this could be one of the ball games where he goes for 120, 130 yards. Number 10, Chris Olave of the New Orleans Saints. And him and Derek Carr, they were on the same page. I know Olave, he missed some of that ball game where he had to leave with an injury, but he came back and he finished the job. And this week on Monday Night Football, pretty good matchup here at the Carolina Panthers. A secondary that I don't think's all that great. I know in week 1 the secondary shut down the Atlanta Falcons, but the Falcons stuck to the ground and pound in that ball game and shredded them on the ground. But anyway, Olave, he's got great receiver ability. He could go out there, run most of the routes. He's athletic as well, getting that jump ball. And he's a guy that's a matchup problem for most corners. So this week with a good matchup and him and Derek Carr on the same page so far, I got him at 10, number 11, Keenan Allen. The Los Angeles Chargers. So Keenan Allen, we know, is a good possession receiver. We know he could get 100 catches per season easily. And last week, he had a pretty decent ball game, is Allen. But right here, in week 2, if Austin Ekeler was out in this game, I think they're going to throw the football more. Is Justin Herbert and his Charger offense at the Tennessee Titans in a grinded-out type of game. But Keenan Allen, as long as he's healthy, he's always in the top 10 to 15 range, minimum at wide receiver position. So I got him at 11 this week. 12, Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins. So Tyreek Hill, we know he's the number 1 receiver there and one of the better receivers in the league, obviously. But Jalen Waddle's a wide receiver that could put up plays and make plays in this dynamic Mike McDaniel offense. So right now, week 1, it wasn't a horrible game, but he had 4 catches, 78 yards, was Jalen Waddle. And he did start the ball game with a 35-yard catch, and then after that, didn't do much. But right here, week 2 in New England, if the game plan is to double or triple team Hill, I think Waddle's going to get that one-on-one coverage, take advantage of it, and have a good game. Number 13, DK Metcalf of the Seattle Seahawks. So a good matchup in Detroit. Last season, we saw Metcalf go off at Detroit here, and him and Geno Smith, they got a good rapport and chemistry over the last season where Geno was the starter. So right now, after a tough loss versus the Rams in week 1, I think they could bounce back offensively, have a good ball game. Like I said, fast carpet over there in Detroit. And they got to put up points if you want to keep up with Detroit, who has pretty high-powered offense as well. Number 14, T. Higgins of the Cincinnati Bengals. I know T. Higgins, he had a horrible game in week 1 where he had the goose egg, but he did have 8 targets, and he knows he has a bit better. So in another division game versus the Baltimore Ravens, who are one of their toughest division rivals here, I think T. Higgins gets back on track. Joe Burrow, I think, gets back on track as well in this ball game. And like I said, Higgins is a great talent, and he's a wide receiver that could go out there and make plays. Number 15, Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Bucks. I was a little weary of Mike Evans coming into the season with Baker Mayfield, but so far in week 1, he looked good. He was running all the routes, and him and Baker had good chemistry, and he was getting the ball to Mike Evans in the spots he needs to get it. Last season, I know he had a lot of drops with Tom Brady, but so far in week 1, he played well. Week 2, here's a good matchup versus the Chicago Bears, where their defense and secondary just got gashed by Jordan Love and Romeo Doubs. So right now, I think Evans has a good ball game and is number 2 wide receiver. He's perfect this week. Number 16, CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys. So he's down on my list because of the matchup. Sauce Gardner is going to be on him. Even though I know Gardner, he didn't look good in week 1 versus that Bill wide receiving core. So right now, I'm still going to temper the expectations a little bit. The Jets know they got to win ball games purely because of the defense now with Rodgers out for the season. And CeeDee Lamb and Gardner is going to be a good matchup, no doubt about it. And you're starting Lamb each and every week, but this week I just think the points could be down a little bit. And even last week where the Cowboys defense dominated, Lamb, he didn't do much and have to do much, where he only had over 11 fantasy points in that one. 17, Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets. So last week, Garrett Wilson, one of the better catches you'll ever see in the end zone over there on that fade route, which it was a horrible thrown ball, but Wilson made the adjustment across his body and tipped it to himself. But this week, it's going to be a tough ball game with obviously Zach Wilson starting the whole game. And then you have Stephon Gilmore with Trevion Diggs on him the whole game. So that's a tough matchup, no doubt about it, for Garrett Wilson. He's a talented wide receiver at it, but with Zach Wilson in there, quarterback, and with either Diggs or Gilmore on him, it could be a long day. And I got him at 17, 18, Brandon Ayuk of the San Francisco 49ers. So Ayuk and Purdy, since last season, they've had great chemistry. And he's pretty much taken over as the number 1 guy, it seems like, since Purdy's been in there over Deebo Samuel. So last week, over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns for Ayuk. I'm not saying he's going to do that this week, but another good matchup with the Rams, where obviously their secondary isn't as good as it used to be. Jalen Ramsey got traded to the Dolphins, and this week I think Ayuk has another good game and is a solid number 2 receiver. Number 19, Amari Cooper of the Cleveland Browns. So Amari Cooper, he's been solid in his Brown career in the first season, and last week he had a pretty decent ball game as well. Deshaun Watson, I feel like, starting to find it a little bit more here now. After last season, it was tough with Watson, where he couldn't get anything going really when he returned. But anyway, Amari Cooper at Pittsburgh, I think he could take advantage of the secondary. We know Cooper's one of the best route runners in the league, And as long as him and Watson keep getting things going and getting on the same page, he's a solid 2 receiver for your team the whole season. Number 20, Mike Williams of the Los Angeles Chargers. So Mike Williams, he had to miss some of that ball game. He left with a head injury but came back and salvaged. And this week here, Forster Neck was out, I think, the ball a little bit more, even though Joshua Kelly's a capable running back as well over there for this Charger team. But Mike Williams, he's an athletic wide receiver. He's a huge deep ball threat, and he's a pinpoint wide receiver as well, where you could throw him that jump ball, and he's going to get it at the high point and make some plays. So this week versus a mediocre Tennessee secondary, I think Williams is a solid number 2 wide receiver option at 21 Deebo Samuel of the San Francisco 49ers. So Deebo's definitely taking a back seat a little bit, obviously, on this offense to Christian McCaffrey and even Brandon Ayuk, I believe here. Brock Purdy has better chemistry with Ayuk, and McCaffrey, obviously, the workhorse running back that could catch and run between the tackles and have big ball games, obviously. So Deebo is a flex option or number 2 wide receiver. I still think he have a good game. He has a good, obviously, track record and career numbers at the Rams for the most part. So this week here versus a Ram defense that did play well versus the Seahawks in week 1. But I think right here, this 49er wide receiving core could have a good ball game. I got 21-22 DeAndre Hopkins of the Tennessee Titans. So DeAndre Hopkins, we know he's a playmaker, still could go out there and make plays. This week, he's got a good matchup of paper versus the Los Angeles Chargers coming to town, where his secondary just got gashed for 466 yards from Tua thrown throughout the year. And Hopkins, they're going to force feed him, it looks like, over there in Tennessee. Tannehill, he targeted him a whole lot in that ball game, and he was 3rd in the league in targets, was Hopkins in week 1. So right now, with a good target share, Ryan Tannehill looking for him early and often in a poor secondary. I got him at 22-23. Chris Godwin of the Tampa Bay Bucks. Chris Godwin, we know he's a possession receiver. We know he's got good hands. He's not really a deep ball threat or a guy who's going to really go down the middle a lot. But right now, is a PPR guy that could catch the ball 6-7 times per game, get 50-60 yards minimum, and find the end zone. He's a perfect number 2 wide receiver. And this week, it's a pretty good matchup versus a Bears defense that really isn't that good coming into town here. So right now, I got him at 23-24, Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens. So Zay Flowers had his coming out party in week 1, and him and Lamar Jackson were on the same page. They even used him in some gadget plays and end around jet sweeps here, is Zay Flowers. And he's a big-time receiver, and we heard it all training camp that Baltimore was big on this rookie. So right now, he went out there, he had the opportunity. He had over 15 fantasy points. I know Mark Andrews most likely is going to come back here in week 2, which should take some targets away, but I think Flowers is the number 2 receiver or flex option is fine for fantasy owners. And I got him at 24-25, Tyler Lockett of the Seattle Seahawks. So Tyler Lockett, we know, is a great receiver. And there's going to be games like last week where he gets under 5 fantasy points, and then there could be games like this week where he could score 20 fantasy points for all we know. So it's a fast carpet indoors at Detroit. We know he's a 1,000-yard receiver no matter what, pretty much each and every season here is Lockett. And this week, I think he gets back on track, but we know wide receiver is the position. So I'm going to tamper the expectations just a bit at 25-26, DJ Moore of the Chicago Bears. So DJ Moore wasn't a good debut for him with the Chicago Bear team. But right here, I think they're going to have to be throwing a lot over there in Tampa, where Tampa's good versus the run here. And 26, I think DJ Moore could be a number 2 flex option for fantasy owners. We know he's a playmaker. We know he could catch a ball yards after catch he saw. We know he could run and get that deep ball as well. And this week here, he's going to have a better performance, obviously, than 4.5 points. I would hope so. He's a solid wide receiver and just had a bad week 1. And this week at 26-27, Jordan Addison of the Minnesota Vikings. Addison, I wasn't sure what his role was going to be out of the gate, but obviously he was in there for a majority of the snaps. And he's a playmaking wide receiver, no doubt about it. He found the end zone in week 1. Him and Kirk Cousins had good chemistry since training camp and preseason. And this week here, I know it's a tough matchup at Philadelphia, but the Eagles defense, they're going to be more focused on Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson. So I think Addison could put on flex numbers in this game. Number 28, Michael Pittman of the Indianapolis Colts. Pittman and Anthony Richardson, they had a good chemistry and a good rapport. Pittman found the end zone in week 1, had double-digit fantasy points, which was a good game to see from him. And hopefully he could build on it. We know this Houston Texan team isn't all that great. And the defense, they just got carved up pretty much by Zay Flowers. So in this one, I think Pittman could have a good ball game, and he could be a wide receiver that could even be above 28 going into next week as well. 29, Puka Nacua. Los Angeles Rams and Nacua, he had his coming out party in week 1. And that's no fluke. He had 15 targets in the ball game, 10 catches, 119 yards. He's a possession wide receiver. And Matthew Stafford obviously has a lot of faith and confidence in him. And he's a wide receiver that just keeps getting open. I know Seattle's secondary isn't all that great, and this week's a very tough matchup versus the Niners, but he's the number one guy over there in terms of volume and just getting open and making plays. Von Jefferson didn't do much. Tutu Atwell, he had a good game as well, over 100 yards. But Nacua, he's the possession receiver and pretty much playing the position of a Cooper Kupp right now. So with Kupp out another 3 weeks, Nacua could be a top 24 guy possibly as well as the weeks go on. But this week with a tough matchup, and it's just one game where he broke out, I got him at 29-30. Terry McLaurin of the Washington Commanders. It could be a long day for McLaurin with a tough matchup at Denver, with Patrick Surtain most likely covering him in this ball game. But we know McLaurin's a good wide receiver. We know he's not 100%, which could be a problem as well. But as a flex option or in deeper leagues, a number 2 wide receiver, I still think Terry McLaurin is pretty decent for fantasy owners. So right now, it's going to be a tough matchup for him with Surtain. But this Commander team, they like chucking the ball around the yard as well. And that's what we saw a lot of Sam Howell. So it could be a ball game where they're trailing early and often, and they're going to have to throw. So right now, I got McLaurin at 30, 31, Christian Kirk of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So I'm not big on Kirk this season here. He pretty much was the 4th or 5th option in that offense in week 1, where he only had 1.90 fantasy points. Obviously, Calvin Ridley's the number 1 wide receiver. Zay Jones, his snap count was bigger than a Christian Kirk in week 1. But Christian Kirk's a talented wide receiver. He got a big contract a couple off seasons ago, and him and Trevor Lawrence last season were on the same page of making plays. I think Kirk possibly could come back, but obviously I said I was going to sit him on my start sit video. But if you're desperate with his upside, I still got him at 31, 32, Jahan Dotson of the Washington Commanders. So Dotson this season definitely could take over as the number 1 man, but we got to see more consistency. I know it's tough with a bad offensive line and not a great quarterback over there in Washington and Sam Howell, where there's going to be some good games and some inconsistent games. And this week's a pretty tough matchup at the Denver Broncos with that altitude and a pretty solid defense over there that just held down Davante Adams for the most part in that Raider offense. I think Dotson could be in for a mediocre to poor day in this one, but with his upside, and he's a receiver that plays a lot of snaps and could make some plays. He's 32, 33, Nico Collins of the Houston Texans. And Nico Collins, he had 14 fantasy points last week. And coming into the season, he definitely was a sleeper option. He's the number 1 wide receiver over there. I know Robert Woods, he had a good ball game. I know they got Tank Dell. Noah Brown they got, even though he went on injured reserve. So right now, Nico Collins, he's going to make plays. CJ Stroud and him had good rapport and good chemistry. And coming off a 14-point game and a pretty decent matchup here versus the Indianapolis Colts, I think Nico Collins could be solid for fantasy owners this week. And I got him at 33, 34, Cortland Sutton of the Denver Broncos. So Jerry Jeudy, we don't know if he's going to play in this game 100%. So I played it safe, kept him off the list. This is a pretty good matchup versus the Washington Commanders. And Cortland Sutton, he did find the end zone week 1 for this Denver Bronco team. So the thing with Sutton's been health and consistency, getting open and making plays. So Russell Wilson, hopefully he's more comfortable this season in the Sean Payton offense, because Cortland Sutton definitely can move up the list as the season goes on. But right now, I'm going to take a wait-and-see approach a little bit more. As a number 3 receiver in 3 receiver leagues and a flex option, I think he's fine this week. Here's Cortland Sutton versus a mediocre Washington secondary. And I got him at 34, 35, Romeo Doubs of the Green Bay Packers. So it looks like to me Christian Watson's not going to play again in this ball game with a nagging hamstring injury. He missed week 1, and Doubs had a good ball game, 4 catches in that one, 2 of them with touchdowns with 30-plus yards. And this week he had a pretty weak Atlanta Falcons secondary. I think Doubs in the indoor dome game could go out there and make some plays here for this Green Bay Packer team, especially if he's the number 1. Him and Jordan Love have a good rapport. He hit him on a nice fade route in the back of the end zone. And Doubs last season, we even saw him make some plays before he got hurt with Aaron Rodgers. And the 36th and final wide receiver I'm ranking this week's Gabe Davis of the Buffalo Bills. So I'm not a big Gabe Davis guy. Last season, I thought he was going to have a good year. He really was inconsistent, didn't do much for most of the season. And right here, week 1, he didn't do much as well. So Josh Allen, he doesn't look all that great. He's just throwing the football pretty much everywhere. And I feel like Gabe Davis is getting open at times, but he's trying to force feed Diggs or run the football too much. So with those factors, even though I know he's got a good matchup on paper versus Vegas, he's not really a wide receiver I'm in on, except in deeper leagues. Right now is Davis. So that's the top 36 wide receivers I'm ranking for week 2 of the fantasy football season.